Hello, boys and girls. Lord Hawkeye here again. Yeah, it's been a while. Sorry, no politics or philosophy today. We're doing something a little more fun. This is a little series I'm going to be doing talking about my D&D campaigns, telling the stories and all the interesting stuff that happened. I asked on my DA page if people were interested in that, and, well, some people were interested, so I decided to go for it. And to those people, I apologize for how long this took. See, what happened was I had tried to record this earlier, and when I played it back to myself to check, it was an absolute mess. I was stuttering, talking too fast, and I don't know, maybe I just got out of practice. But anyway, hopefully this time works a little better. Anyway, so little quick backstory. I played D&D as a teenager way back. I didn't DM back then. My friend DM'd, and I'll be honest, they weren't all that great. None of them lasted more than a few sessions, but it was all part of the learning experience. And eventually I started DMing it myself, playing online. I did that on a message board for a while, and I'll be honest, again, I was not very good back then. I was a teenager. What do you want from me? So anyway, I stopped for a while. I was busy with other things, until eventually, a few years ago, I decided to get back into it, relearn everything, because I had all the books, and I figured, hey, why are they gathering dust here? So I asked around, found some people who were interested, and after a lot of work, guess what? We're still playing years later. Pretty much the same group. A couple people have come and gone, but it's been a pretty static group all this time, so I consider myself very lucky there. A lot of people get stuck on that. And especially before the internet. Before the internet, if you were born in the wrong location, you were just screwed. Your efforts to play D&D were just dead in the water right away. So it's tough getting over that wall. So anyone who's looking to get into it, do be ready to be patient, because there is that part to get over. Anyways, on to what we did. I first started playing kind of a generic setting just to get myself back into the swing of things. And it lasted for a while, but eventually someone had to leave. And then I got a great idea to kind of separate myself a little bit. What I did was, I decided I would start playing D&D using the Monster Girl universe. Now, some of you may not know what that is. In short, it's a universe where a lot of mythical monsters are females who have the hots for men. Yeah, it's kind of silly, but it does make sense when you look at it. There is a wiki about it, although I will warn you, there is not safe for work material in this, so do be ready for that. Although we way tone that stuff down in our sessions because it would be kind of awkward, let's be honest. Anyways, here's the story of it in a nutshell. And do keep in mind, I do take some liberties with it, partly because they leave a lot of stuff unexplained, and partly just to fit my own storylines. So anyone who's really anal about the lore, well, I'm sorry. No, I'm not. Anyways, what I do is, the story goes like this. Once upon a time, there was a succubus by the name of Mao. She was a mistress to some powerful demon prince, but eventually she got tired of that. He was always off doing wars, and she grew very resentful of war. She lost a lot of lovers to it. It was keeping her love away from her. She very much hated war. And eventually she overthrew him, took his power for himself, and became a demon lord in and of herself. And at first, she kind of just wanted to use it to live a nice life of comfort and pleasure, not really caring about the whole fight against the heavens and all that sort of thing. And then all that changed when a knight by the name of Drothel came along. He had been sent to slay her. But when they got to know each other a little better, they realized they actually had a lot in common. Drothel himself is always questioning why the human race has always had to fight against monsters, and there was just no end to it. He wanted all that to stop, not just keep it going and soak in the glory and all that sort of thing. And that's when they hatched a plan. The two of them had actually ended up marrying each other, and they had a great idea. to create their ideal world where all the females are monsters, and all the males are humans, or humanoids rather. And thus, basically, everything becomes just like them. They end up marrying each other, and the wars end. And that's what they've both been setting out to do. So that's the setup. So there are monster girls in the universe. They all have their differences. They all have their own tastes and all this sort of thing. What they all have in common is they are lustful by nature, and they have intense love for human men. And human women, they want to share their gift with them and make them monster girls too. That's the basic idea. I know it's kind of kooky, but it's fun. We like it, so who cares? Anyways, so our first campaign, I was going for, again, a pretty standard approach because I was out of practice, so I wasn't going to get too fancy with it. Although, if I may toot my own horn, I did throw some nice curves their way, so it was still entertaining. Anyway, so our group, here's what it came to. You can see in the picture here, the two standing behind them, that is Mao and Drathel, or at least my interpretations of them. Drawn by the one and only Akashi. Thank you very much. And in front of them is our group. Okay, starting from the left, we have Laxus, an alchemist, and also a Shoggoth monster girl. Yeah, take a Shoggoth and make her sexy. And it actually works. She was an interesting character, in that the player playing her was not always the best for characterizing. He kind of was... I wouldn't say he was a min-maxer. He kind of was a little bit. He kind of was more concerned with like poring over splat books and optimizing builds and all that sort of thing. Wasn't the best at writing good characters, but Laxus, I was actually surprised how Laxus ended up turning out. You see, what they did was, with a little encouragement from me, he got her to set up an apothecary in the city they were living in. She started doing bigger and bigger stuff, and what she ended up turning into, she was kind of like, what if a mad scientist was playing for the good guys? Like, she delved into mutations and all kinds of weird stuff, but it was ultimately to serve the cause of good. So she actually ended up being a very interesting character in that regard. So yeah, that was Laxus. Moving over, we've got Suhebi, It's a Naga, though it's like an Eastern Naga, and it has a name I cannot spell or pronounce, so my apologies there. But yeah, she's the cleric of the group. She's a cleric of Mao, very devoted to that. In fact, at one point in the plot, she started petitioning to get a Temple of Mao built in the city, which she eventually did. And that was also interesting, where once enough interest was drummed up, she actually was brought before a group of investors and had to make a case to them. It was really neat. Really got the character going more. Next over, we got Ariella, a Nikoni monk. Nikoni are a race I created myself. Details viewable on my DA page if you're really interested. Anyway, she's a monk, and she was always a fun character, just overall, just kind of a life of the party sort of character. And the player playing her, yeah, he learned. I warned him early on that monk is a real slow burner class, kind of like wizards. Not quite as bad as wizards, but pretty up there. Where they start off really weak but get really strong later. Early on, he was kind of complaining about how he was always doing less than the fighter could, and all that sort of thing. And I told him, you're gonna have to just stick with it. I told you this was a hard path, and he had his doubts. But in the end, by the end of the game, this character would just charge in and do this like 8-hit fatality combo. It was ridiculous. This character was just terrifying by the end of the game. Next up, we've got Tobe, a salamander fighter. This was actually a character who started off as a human and became a monster girl later on due to circumstances. This is actually something the player wanted to happen, so no, I didn't screw him over or anything, so don't get the wrong idea. Yeah, Tobe was a pretty standard character, but still pretty neat. Next up, we've got Nisha, a machine smith, and a tiefling. So yeah, she was not a monster girl. So a machine smith is kind of like, also called a technomancer in some circles. It's someone who combines magic and technology, hence the mechanical wolf she had with her. That was a part of her class. She got a little mechanical pet. And next up, we've got Cephas, also a tiefling and a rogue. So, that was our party lineup. They met early on the way to the city. They were heading to this big city. I'll get into details on that. They did a standard quest together due to the circumstances of meeting up, and ended up joining up together and going to live in the city. Now, the city is called the City of Union. Now, I stole this idea from the Epic Levels handbook. This basically took place before Union became what it became in that book, which I'll get into later. The basic story behind it was a group of mercanes. Mercanes are a race of interplanar merchants. They travel all over the plains selling various wares, magical weapons, and other stuff too. And they're welcome all over. Like, they sell to heaven, they sell to hell, they sell everywhere. And just because they know how to get stuff, and they're very good negotiators. And a group of them got together and decided, hey, why should we travel all over the plains? Why don't we get the trade to come to us instead? So they pooled their resources and worked to create a huge trading city. They wanted to make the biggest trading city the plains had ever seen. And it worked. The city was a very big trading area, and they took a very hands-off approach to how they rule. They have a police force that they hire themselves called the Union Sentinels. They pay them very well, and they keep the peace. But generally, they're very hands-off in their approach. They don't interfere. They don't try to tell people how to run their lives. All they care about is keeping the economy moving. So it's kind of an ideal capitalist city, and it works very well because, well, yeah, you know my politics. Anyways, so that was the setup. Here's how the story basically went down, as best I can remember. So they do some stuff in the city, they do a couple odd jobs, and eventually they end up earning the enmity of the Thieves Guild in the city. They had crossed paths with them a lot, so they interfered with a lot of their operations, which the Thieves Guild wasn't too happy about. Eventually, at one point, they intercept this trade going on with a Thieves Guild member and this wizard, and when they fight the wizard, they ends up revealing this wizard is undead, like he's a skeleton. And he wasn't a lich or anything. He wasn't quite that high up, but anyway, they beat him, and they found what the Thieves Guild was trading. He was trading to him this black book, and this was a real weird book because it was decorated with like skulls and all sorts of symbols of death. But what was really strange about it is that none of them could read it. Like, even the machine smith, she had like a shit ton of languages. She had a really high intelligence score, and she had comprehend languages, and even that couldn't allow her to read it. She just could not make sense of a single word of it. So this was really weird. They did not know what this book was. They were really curious as to what was in it, that nothing could read it. And they took it to the mage college in the city, and the mage college couldn't read it either. Like, these were like the highest level mages in the whole city, and even they couldn't figure out how to read it. Until they eventually, I can't remember how they figured this out, but what they realized was it was written in these special words that can't be read by the living. They can only be read by the undead. So they brought it to, I think there was a graveyard somewhere where there was a ghost haunting it, and they actually managed to convince the ghost to read it. And sure enough, the ghost could read it just fine. And it contained some lost secrets of necromancy. Doing some research, they figured out that this is one of a series of books that were written by Orcus, the demon prince of death. He was believed to be the one who first created necromancy and taught it to mortals. And he wrote these books containing various secrets of the undead. Like, there was one about how to spell stitch undead. Like, you could put arcane tattoos on undead, giving them magical abilities. There was one that would alter undead to make them look like they were living. There was, at one point, someone who created ghouls in the likeness of the players in an effort to try to discredit them, but they managed to put a stop to that. So the Thieves Guild was looking for these black books and selling them to these guys. They didn't know who these guys were. And eventually, they ended up provoking the Thieves Guild to the point where the Thieves Guild attacked them in their house, like ambushed the whole house. Almost their full force was out there, including their guild leader. So they had this huge fight in their house, and they went out into the streets and fought them all there. It was a big throwdown fight. And when they ended up beating the guild master of the Thieves Guild, that's when it was revealed he was being mind controlled. But before he could say anything, he got assassinated. And that's when they were contacted by this vampire who was living in the city, and he was the one controlling the guildmaster. And he had captured the leader of the Sentinels. These guys were in very good terms with the Sentinels because of the work they had done. And he'd kidnapped the leader of the Sentinels and told them that they were to bring the black books they had found to him, or the leader of the Sentinels was going to get it. So they had to go to the mansion there, and they fought the vampire, and they did beat him too. And they found out he was not the leader of all this. Oh no. He was taking orders from someone higher up. Someone called Tobe Uttercold. Yeah, that was the name. He was this very powerful lich. And doing some more detective work, they eventually found out who these guys really were. They were a cult called the Black Flame. Now, the story, and doing more investigating on these guys were worshippers of a demon prince called Sonachard. Sonachard was a demon prince of war. And he also happened to be the general of Orcus. So he worked for Orcus. And these guys were a cult who worshipped him. And further research found out he was actually the demon prince that Mao was the lover of, and that she eventually killed and took the powers from. So these guys have got a big grudge against Mao and against Monster Girls, because they killed their leader, their worshipper, the guy they worshipped. And it was believed that they had disbanded after Sonachard was killed, but then it turned out no, Tobe Uttercold had been working to bring them back together, and the reason why they were looking for these black books was because one of them contained a secret that would allow them to bring Sonachard back to life as a Death Knight. And of course, that would be very bad if it happened, so now their goal was clear. They had to find this book first and stop the Black Flame cult from doing this. Because if Sonachard ever come back, he would wreak vengeance upon the Monster Girls, and upon the world in general, because he'd be pretty pissed off about everything. So, they did this big globe-trotting adventure all over the world, trying to find these black books, and hopefully find the one that they were looking for before Tobe Uttercold could. So, let's see, what happened after that? Eventually, to find it, they had to find this artifact. It was this map with a circlet with it, that when you wore the circlet and looked at the map, it could find pretty much anything for you, because they found out that the book they were looking for was on this island that moved randomly, so there was no way to track it, and so this artifact was the one way they could find it. They learned about this because one of the Mercane councilmen who ran the city, they had been on very good terms with him because he was the one who hired them to get rid of the Thieves Guild, which they did, so he was very pleased about that, rewarded them quite handsomely for it. And eventually he told them about this circlet in the map. It was an expedition that he had planned to do for a while, but it ended up getting shelved because he was busy with getting the city going. So he helped them get this expedition going. They went to this big pyramid, huge dungeon full of lots of nasty stuff, mummies who gave them all kinds of trouble. And they fought the pharaoh at the end, defeated him, and they got the circlet and the map. And in addition, they also found the pharaoh's greatest treasure. It was this giant intelligent dragon ship. It was like an airship. It looked like a dragon, and it could talk. So this was amazing. Now they could travel in style. It was great. But when they got back to the city and were looking to find the island, that's when the Black Flame cult made their move. The city was attacked by this flesh colossus. You know how a flesh golem is like a Frankenstein monster? A flesh colossus is made up of like hundreds and hundreds of corpses all merged together into a giant creature capable of destroying a city. So they actually fought this thing using the dragon ship. They had to load cannons, and they had a harpoon. They had a big breath. He had a big breath attack they could ready. It was a real epic fight. And this thing would like pull trees out of the air and swing it at the airship. It would like rip up sections of the ground, throw it at them, and it could like shed zombies onto their ship they had to deal with. It was an awesome fight. I really loved how it turned out. So anyway, it turns out One of the members of the Black Flame cult was a black dragon who had the book that enabled him to create a flesh colossus. And he was going to create more and attack the city, so they had to go deal with him. Which they did. They went in, they fought this dragon, they killed him and took his book from him. Now they had pretty much all the black books except for the one they needed, conveniently enough. And unfortunately, the attack by the Flesh Colossus was a diversion. It gave Taval Uttercold the time to get to the island himself. He had found it through other means. And he got the book. So he was going to revive Sonachard. So they had to go to his tower way up in the icy mountains, and they had to stop him before he could complete the ritual. So they set off that way. Now on the way, they were contacted by none other than Orcus. Yep, a big fiery image of Orcus appeared on their ship and wished to parley with them. Yeah, sometimes it's scarier when like the big bad evil guys, when they want to talk to you rather than fight you. In some ways, it can be scarier when that happens, just because you just never know what he's going to do. Because this is like one of the most powerful demon princes in the world. These guys would never put a finger on him if they fought him. Anyways, he told them more of the story about Sonachard. And one thing he told them is that he asked them, "Do you have any idea how Mao took Sonachard's power?" Well, it turns out that Sonachard was Orcus's general, as I mentioned earlier. But Orcus knew that the day was coming when Sonachard's ambition was going to outstrip his loyalty. And while Orcus wasn't afraid of Sonachard overthrowing him, the problem was Orcus has got a lot of enemies out there who would love to take advantage of the distraction if Sonachard were to try to rebel against him. So rather than face that risk, he decided to just eliminate Sonachard through indirect means. He knew that Sonachard had a mistress that was growing impatient with him and was sick and tired of being left alone while he was off doing wars and all that. So he whispered in her ear and told her how she could drain his power from him and kill him. And of course, that mistress was Mao. So Orcus was inadvertently responsible for the creation of the Monster Girls. It wasn't his intention, but personally, he doesn't really care about the Monster Girls. They don't really have anything to do with him. So he says, "Yeah, you go ahead, pursue your silly little pet project. I don't care." So that's what happened to Sonachard. Now, he explained to the group that Sonachard's soul was pretty enduring. So even if they killed him, someone else could eventually bring him back anyway, and he would still enact his revenge against the Monster Girls, and it would be pretty horrible. So they were faced with a problem. Even if they killed him, it would only be a temporary fix. So Orcus offered them a deal. Yeah, this is not good. He told them if they gave him back all of his black books, the one they had found, he would give them this dagger that would allow them to seal Sonachard's soul so that he couldn't come back again. Yeah, they were incredibly suspicious of this, but they didn't have much of a choice, and they really had no use for the black books themselves anyway. Plus, it would probably be better if they were in Orcus's hands rather than just lying around where anyone could find them. So they reluctantly ended up agreeing to the deal. So the deal was done. He did give them a dagger that seemed to do the trick. So they went to Taval Uttercold's tower and fought through all of the nastiest minions this guy had while he was at the top floor frantically trying to get the ceremony done before they could get to him. So they reached him, and they found he was at this big thing he had set up. He had the black book there, so he put up a barrier around it while he fought the players, and he was like a level 20. He was like a level 20 wizard, so he was incredibly powerful. But they eventually managed to get through his defenses, and they defeated him. Well, didn't quite defeat him. He was like on it. He was like on the edge, and he teleported into the field. And it turns out the ceremony was still going while they were fighting. He had fought them just to buy himself enough time to complete it, and he did. And Sonachard was brought back to life. So not good. And it took the last of his strength to do that. So Taval was defeated, although his phylactery was still there, which Sonachard took. And then he teleported to the roof and challenged them to fight him. because he figured, hey, let's get a warm-up going as a little sneak preview is what he's going to do to the rest of the monster girls. So they teleported there, and they fought Sonichard. And, well, they won. They beat him, and then when they stabbed him with the dagger, well, it did do something to his soul, but they weren't sure what. And then all of a sudden, Orcus himself actually teleports behind him. This time, it's him in person. Well, he partially told the truth. The dagger did seal his soul, which then Orcus used to draw into his wand and capture it for himself. Now he could torture his soul and eventually bring him back, only this time much more loyal to him. So he got Sonichard's soul, and he got Taval Uttercold's phylactery as a nice little bonus. So he was quite pleased with their performance, enough that he let them go. He told them, go back and enjoy your victory and all that sort of thing. I don't care. I got what I wanted and more. Thanks a lot, suckers. And he disappeared back to the abyss. And that was it. That was the basic story of it. It was a pretty standard D&D story, but I think it was really good for me coming back after having been absent from the fight for a long time, so to speak. And I did make references to it, like in future campaigns, there would be references to the previous events. Like I kind of like continuity, so sometimes the players would hear stories about these legendary heroes of the past and stuff like that. So I always liked slipping in stuff like that. In fact, in the current campaign I'm doing, the characters in this are NPCs in the city. The city of Union eventually grew to the point that it became a planar metropolis, like it's in its own demi-plane. It has portals to all the other planes out there. So it's now a big trading hub between all the planes. So really fun setting. And that was the basic premise of how I set everything up and got the Monster Girl universe going into it. So that was the story of the first one I did. I've got 2 others to tell, and one I'm currently working on, so there'll be more stories to come. Until then, be aware, and be wise.